I watched through my kitchen window as Deborah Hartman's pearl white Mercedes slid sideways across the icy cul-de-sac. Her face twisted in panic as she tried to regain control. It was -18 degrees Fahrenheit in Bismarck, North Dakota, and the worst cold snap in 20 years had turned our quiet subdivision into a frozen wasteland. Meanwhile, my truck sat warm and cozy in my heated garage, ready to start at the turn of a key. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering Deborah had spent the last 3 months making my life absolute hell over that very same garage. My name is Ethan Vance, and I'm a mechanical engineer who moved to North Dakota 2 years ago for a job with an oil equipment company. I bought a nice 4-bedroom house in Meadowbrook Estates, a planned community on the northern edge of Bismarck. The house came with a standard 2-car garage, which was fine until I started working on a restoration project for a 1967 Mustang. I needed more space and temperature control for the detailed work, so I applied for a permit through the city to build an addition to my garage and install a heating system. The city approved everything within 6 weeks. I hired a reputable contractor, got all my inspections passed, and by September, I had a beautiful heated 3-car garage with proper insulation, ventilation, and a high-efficiency heating system. I could work on my Mustang even in the dead of winter, and my daily driver would never have to suffer through the brutal North Dakota cold. It was perfect, or so I thought. 2 days after the final inspection, I found a letter in my mailbox from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The letter, signed by Deborah Hartman, HOA president, informed me that my garage addition violated several covenants, codes, and restrictions. According to Deborah, I had failed to get HOA approval before construction. The garage was too large and created an eyesore, and the heating system was an unnecessary energy expenditure that reflected poorly on the community's commitment to environmental responsibility. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. I had specifically checked the HOA bylaws before starting construction. There was nothing in the CCRs about garage additions requiring HOA approval beyond standard city permits. The size restrictions mentioned in the letter didn't exist in any official documentation I had received when I bought the house. And the environmental responsibility clause was something Deborah had apparently invented on the spot. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter and got Deborah's voicemail. Her message was clipped and formal, asking callers to leave detailed messages and stating that she returned calls within 3 business days. I left a polite but firm message explaining that I had followed all proper procedures and asking to discuss the matter at her earliest convenience. 3 business days passed with no response. On day 4, I received another letter, this one threatening me with daily fines of $200 if I didn't submit plans to remove the garage addition within 30 days. I decided it was time to attend an HOA meeting in person. The next meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse. I arrived 15 minutes early and found Deborah setting up folding chairs with 2 other board members. Deborah was exactly what I had pictured from her letters. A woman in her early 50s with severely highlighted blonde hair, designer glasses that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant wherever she went. "You must be Ethan Vance," she said without offering her hand. "I recognized your address from the attendance sheet. That's right. I wanted to discuss the letters I've been receiving about my garage." "There's nothing to discuss. You violated the CCRs. You need to remove the addition." She turned back to arranging papers on the head table. I reviewed the CCRs before construction. There's no provision requiring HOA approval for garage additions that have city permits. Deborah spun around, her eyes narrowing. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B clearly states that any exterior modification that materially changes the appearance of a property requires written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I read that section. My garage addition doesn't materially change the appearance. It matches the existing structure perfectly, uses the same materials, and maintains the same roofline. My contractor specifically designed it that way to comply with the CCRs. That's your interpretation. The board has determined it does materially change the appearance. Then I'd like to appeal that determination. What's the appeals process? Deborah's mouth tightened into a thin line. You can submit a written appeal to the board. We'll review it at our discretion. The meeting started shortly after with about 20 residents in attendance. Deborah ran through standard business: approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, updates on landscaping contracts. Then she reached new business and looked directly at me. We have a violation matter concerning 4782 Clearwater Drive. Mr. Vance has constructed an unpermitted garage addition that violates our CCRs. The board has voted to require removal within 30 days or impose daily fines. An elderly man in the back raised his hand. Did he get city permits? That's irrelevant to HOA requirements, Deborah snapped. Actually, it's not irrelevant, I said, standing up. I have all required city permits, all inspections passed, and I specifically designed the addition to comply with the CCRs. I believe the board is misinterpreting the regulations. A younger woman in her 30s spoke up. Can we see the relevant section of the CCRs? I'm curious about the specific language. Deborah's face flushed. The board has already made its determination. This isn't open for community debate. But the CCRs say any homeowner can request review of board decisions. The woman persisted. I'm Linda Brennan, by the way. I'm an attorney, and I'd like to understand the legal basis for this decision. I could have kissed Linda Brennan right then. Deborah fumbled with her papers, clearly flustered. One of the other board members, a balding man in his 60s, leaned over and whispered something to her. She listened, then nodded stiffly. Fine. We'll table this matter for further review. Mr. Vance, your fines are suspended pending that review. Next item on the agenda. After the meeting, Linda Brennan introduced herself properly and offered to look over my documentation. We met for coffee the next morning at a cafe downtown. I brought copies of everything: my original CCRs from the house purchase, the city permits, inspection reports, and photographs of the garage from multiple angles. Linda spent 30 minutes reviewing the materials, making notes on a legal pad. Finally, she looked up with a slight smile. Deborah doesn't have a leg to stand on. You're completely in compliance. The section she cited requires approval only for modifications that materially change appearance, and you've clearly maintained architectural consistency. Moreover, the CCRs define material change as alterations visible from the street that don't match existing structures. Your garage is barely visible from the street because of the landscaping, and it perfectly matches your house. So why is she pushing this? Linda sighed. I've dealt with Deborah before. She has a history of selectively enforcing rules against people she doesn't like or people she perceives as threats. You're young, you have a nice house, you clearly have a good job. Some people are threatened by that. That's insane. Welcome to HOA politics. Here's my advice. Document everything. Respond to every letter in writing and don't remove that garage. If she actually tries to impose fines, we can fight it in court, and you'll almost certainly win. The HOA might even be liable for your legal fees under North Dakota law if their actions are deemed arbitrary or capricious. I followed Linda's advice. Over the next 2 months, I received 6 more letters from Deborah, each escalating in tone and threats. I responded to each one calmly and professionally, citing specific CCR sections and offering to meet with the board to resolve the matter. Deborah never accepted my offers to meet. Then the fine started. In late October, I received a notice that I was being fined $200 per day, retroactive to the date of the first letter. The total came to over $18,000. The letter stated that if I didn't pay within 15 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. That's when I hired Linda Brennan officially. She filed an injunction in Burleigh County District Court to stop the fines and challenged the HOA's authority to impose them. The hearing was scheduled for early December, which gave us plenty of time to prepare. Meanwhile, winter arrived with a vengeance. By mid-November, temperatures were regularly dropping below zero. I used my heated garage constantly, warming up my truck in the mornings and working on the Mustang on weekends. The heating system was incredibly efficient, maintaining a comfortable 65 degrees inside while outside temperatures plummeted. I noticed that several of my neighbors were struggling with their vehicles. The extreme cold was brutal on batteries and engines. I'd see people in the mornings trying to jump-start their cars or waiting for remote starters to warm their engines enough to turn over. A few times, I helped neighbors with jumper cables or offered to let them warm up in my garage while their cars ran. Deborah lived 4 houses down from me in a sprawling colonial with columns out front. She drove a Mercedes S-Class that probably cost more than my annual salary. I'd see her most mornings, usually leaving around 8 o'clock for whatever activities occupied her days. As the cold intensified, I noticed she was having trouble with her car too. Several times, I saw her sitting in the driver's seat, waiting for the engine to warm up, her breath visible in the frigid air. The court hearing arrived on December 8th. Linda and I met at the courthouse with a thick binder of documentation. Deborah appeared with the HOA's attorney, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who clearly wished he was somewhere else. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Thornton, listened to both sides. Linda presented our case methodically, walking through the CCRs, showing that I had complied with all requirements, and demonstrating that the HOA's interpretation was inconsistent with the plain language of their own rules. She also presented evidence that Deborah had selectively enforced rules, pointing out 3 other properties with similar improvements that had never been challenged. The HOA's attorney argued weakly that the board had discretion to interpret the CCRs and that they believed in good faith that my garage violated community standards. Judge Thornton cut him off mid-sentence. "Counselor, I've read the CCRs. They're quite clear. Mr. Vance's garage addition complies with the plain language of the regulations. The board's interpretation appears arbitrary at best. I'm granting the injunction and ordering the HOA to rescind all fines. Furthermore, Mr. Vance is entitled to recover his reasonable attorney's fees and costs. Do you want to take this to trial, or will the HOA stipulate to those terms?" The attorney conferred briefly with Deborah, whose face had gone bright red. He turned back to the judge. "We'll stipulate, Your Honor." "Excellent. Order signed. Next case." We were done in under 30 minutes. Outside the courtroom, Linda shook my hand with a grin. "That was beautiful. Judge Thornton is tough but fair. She hates HOAs that abuse their power. So it's over. It's over. They'll have to pay my fees, which should be around $5,000 given the hours I put in." and Deborah will have to back off. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Deborah might have lost in court, but she wasn't done making my life difficult. Over the next 2 weeks, I received violation notices for increasingly petty infractions. My trash cans were visible from the street 15 minutes before the allowed time. My lawn had a single bare patch that violated landscaping standards. My house numbers were 1/4 inch too small according to a regulation I'd never heard of. I documented everything and forwarded it all to Linda, who sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA's attorney pointing out that this could constitute harassment and could lead to additional legal action. The notices stopped, but I could feel Deborah's hostility every time I saw her in the neighborhood. Then came the week before Christmas, and with it, the worst cold snap North Dakota had seen in 2 decades. The weather forecast started warning about it 5 days in advance. An Arctic blast was dropping down from Canada, and temperatures were expected to hit -20 during the day and -30 at night. Wind chills would be in the -50 range. Authorities were warning people to stay inside unless absolutely necessary, to check on elderly neighbors, and to make sure vehicles were properly winterized. I prepared carefully. I stocked up on groceries, made sure my heating system was working perfectly, and checked my truck's antifreeze levels. I also made sure the Mustang was safely stored and that my garage heating system was functioning optimally. The garage became a refuge, a warm bubble in the middle of an Arctic nightmare. The cold hit on a Monday morning. I woke up to a temperature reading of -22 degrees. The windows had frost on the inside despite my house heat running full blast. I made coffee and looked outside to see a neighborhood transformed into a frozen landscape. Trees were encased in ice, power lines sagged under the weight of frost, and the few cars on the street looked like they belonged in a documentary about Antarctic exploration. My truck, sitting in the heated garage, started immediately when I turned the key. The engine purred to life, warm and ready. I didn't need to go anywhere, but I started it anyway just to confirm everything was working perfectly. Around 9 in the morning, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Deborah standing on my porch, wrapped in an expensive-looking parka, her face pinched with cold and something else I couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about something important." Her breath came out in thick clouds of vapor. "Come in before you freeze." I stepped back to let her enter, more out of basic human decency than any desire to be hospitable. She stepped inside, shivering. "Thank you. This cold is just unbearable. It's pretty extreme. Weather Service says it's going to last all week." "Yes, well, that's actually why I'm here." She paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. "My car won't start. The battery is completely dead, and even with a jump, the engine won't turn over. I called a service, but they said it's too cold for the mechanics to safely work outside, and they're completely overwhelmed with calls anyway." "That's rough. A lot of people are having car trouble in this weather. I noticed your truck has been running fine." "Yeah, the heated garage makes a big difference." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "I was wondering if you might have space in your garage for my car, just temporarily until the cold snap passes." "I have several appointments this week that I can't miss, and I need reliable transportation." I stared at her, genuinely shocked by the audacity. This woman had spent 3 months trying to force me to tear down the very garage she was now asking to use. She'd cost me time, stress, and thousands of dollars in legal fees. And now she wanted a favor. "You want to put your car in my garage, just for a few days? I'd be very grateful." "The garage you tried to make me demolish," her face flushed. I was just doing my job as HOA president. It wasn't personal. It felt pretty personal to me, Deborah. You filed nearly $20,000 in fines and tried to put a lien on my house over a garage that was completely compliant with the CCRs. The judge agreed with you. That's settled now. The judge forced you to back down. That's different from you acknowledging you were wrong, she bristled. I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm asking for help as a neighbor. Isn't that what people do in situations like this? Neighbors help each other, sure. But we're not exactly neighbors in that sense, are we? We're more like adversaries who happen to live on the same street. So you're refusing. I'm saying I find it incredibly ironic that you're asking to use the very thing you tried to force me to destroy. Deborah's expression hardened. Fine. I see where you stand. She turned and headed for the door, yanking it open and letting in a blast of Arctic air before slamming it shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, feeling a mix of satisfaction and unease. Part of me enjoyed the poetic justice of the situation, but another part wondered if I should have been the bigger person. Then, I remembered the stress of those 3 months, the court appearances, the constant violation notices, and I decided I had made the right call. Over the next 2 days, the temperature dropped even further. -25, then -28. The wind howled constantly, creating drifts of snow that blocked streets and buried cars. I ventured out once to help an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, whose furnace was acting up. I checked her system, adjusted a few things, and got it running properly again. She thanked me profusely and offered me cookies, which I accepted gratefully. On Wednesday morning, I looked out my window and saw chaos in Deborah's driveway. Her Mercedes was completely dead, covered in frost and ice. But that wasn't the only problem. Her husband's BMW was also frozen solid. Both cars sat like ice sculptures in the brutal cold. I could see Deborah and her husband, Richard, standing outside in heavy winter gear, staring at the vehicles with obvious frustration. An hour later, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Richard Hartman. He was a tall man in his late 50s, usually confident and put together, but today he looked exhausted and stressed. "Ethan, I need to talk to you. Come in." He stepped inside, stomping snow off his boots. "I'm going to be direct. Deborah told me she talked to you about using your garage. I know things have been tense between you two, but I'm asking you to reconsider. Both our cars are completely frozen. We can't get them started no matter what we try. I have to get to work. I'm a surgeon at Sanford Medical Center, and I have patients scheduled for critical procedures this week." That changed things. I didn't care much about Deborah's social appointments, but people needing surgery was a different matter entirely. "You're a surgeon, cardiac surgeon. I have 2 valve replacements scheduled this week and a bypass on Friday. These aren't procedures we can delay indefinitely. My patients are counting on me." I thought about it for a moment. "Okay, but I need to be clear about something. I'm not doing this for Deborah. I'm doing it because people need medical care, and that's more important than our dispute. But this is temporary, just until the cold snap breaks." Richard's relief was visible. "Thank you. I really appreciate this. And for what it's worth, I told Deborah that whole garage thing was ridiculous. I didn't agree with how she handled it, but you know how she gets about HOA business. I'm learning." Richard went back to get his BMW. I opened my garage door, moved my truck to the 3rd bay, and made room for his car. It took about 30 minutes of running the engine with a portable heater aimed at it before the BMW would even start. Once it did, Richard carefully drove it into my garage. The warmth immediately began defrosting the ice caked on every surface. "Leave it here for a few hours to fully warm up," I said. "The battery should recharge and all the fluids will get back to proper operating temperature. You should be able to drive it this afternoon. I can't thank you enough. What do I owe you for this? Nothing. Just help your patients. Richard left, and I went back to my work from home setup. Around 2 in the afternoon, he returned and carefully drove the BMW out of the garage. The car was running smoothly, fully thawed and functional. He waved as he left, presumably heading to the hospital. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That evening, my doorbell rang a third time. I opened it to find Deborah again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 other women, all around her age, all looking cold and miserable. I recognized them as other members of the HOA board and active community members. "Ethan, we need to talk to you about a community emergency," Deborah said, her tone trying for authoritative but landing somewhere closer to desperate. "What kind of emergency?" A brunette woman I recognized as Patricia Simmons spoke up. 15 households in Meadowbrook Estates have non-functioning vehicles right now. The temperature is supposed to drop to -32 tonight. People can't get to work, can't get to medical appointments, can't buy groceries. It's becoming a crisis. That's terrible, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it. "Your garage," said another woman, Karen Mitchell, who I knew was the HOA treasurer. "You have a heated 3-car garage. You could help people get their cars started." I looked at Deborah. "Is this seriously happening right now?" She had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I know this is awkward given our history, but this is about the community, not about us. Not about us. You spent 3 months trying to destroy the garage you now want to use as a community warming center for cars. I admit I may have been overzealous in interpreting the CCRs," Deborah said stiffly. "But people are suffering. Doesn't that matter more than our past disagreements?" The woman who hadn't spoken yet, blonde and wearing designer everything, stepped forward. "I'm Susan Chambers. We haven't met formally. Look, I know Deborah handled the garage situation badly. Several of us on the board thought she was overreaching, but she was insistent. Now we're in a crisis, and you have the only solution in the neighborhood. Please consider helping." I looked at the 4 women standing on my porch, literally shivering in the brutal cold. They were asking me to do exactly what Deborah had tried to prevent me from being able to do. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "I'll help on 3 conditions," I said finally. "First, Deborah has to publicly acknowledge in writing that my garage addition was fully compliant with HOA regulations and that the enforcement action was improper. Second, that statement gets distributed to all residents in the community. Third, Deborah resigns as HOA president." Deborah's face went pale, then red. "That's extortion. No, it's accountability. You abused your position, cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, and caused me significant stress. The judge already ruled against you. All I'm asking is that you acknowledge what happened and step down from a position you've proven you can't handle responsibly. This is outrageous." Patricia put a hand on Deborah's arm. "Deborah, he's right. You know he's right. What you did was wrong, and we all knew it at the time. I'm sorry I didn't speak up stronger back then, but I'm speaking up now. Accept his terms." "I will not be forced to resign." Susan spoke quietly but firmly. "Then people's cars stay frozen, Deborah, including yours. Is your pride worth that?" The 4 women stood in tense silence. I could see the calculation happening behind Deborah's eyes, the weighing of options. Finally, she spoke through gritted teeth. "Fine. I'll write the statement and resign. Tonight. I want the statement drafted tonight, and I want to see the resignation letter before I help anyone." Deborah glared at me with pure hatred but nodded. The 4 women left, and I closed the door, feeling both triumphant and slightly guilty. Was I being petty? Maybe. But Deborah had shown no remorse until she needed something from me. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions. 2 hours later, my email pinged. It was from Deborah's personal email address. The subject line read, "Acknowledgement and Resignation." I opened it and found two attachments. The first was a statement addressed to all Meadowbrook Estates residents. "Dear neighbors, I am writing to acknowledge an error in judgment regarding the property at 4782 Clearwater Drive. Earlier this year, I initiated enforcement action against Ethan Vance concerning his garage addition, claiming it violated HOA regulations. A court review determined that Mr. Vance's garage was fully compliant with our CCRs and that the enforcement action was improper. I should not have pursued this matter as aggressively as I did. The garage addition met all requirements and Mr. Vance followed proper procedures. I apologize to Mr. Vance for the stress and expense this caused him, and I apologize to the community for the distraction this created. Effective immediately, I am resigning as HOA president. I will remain a resident of Meadowbrook Estates, but will no longer serve in any official capacity with the HOA. Sincerely, Deborah Hartman. The second attachment was a formal resignation letter to the board. Both documents were signed. I read them twice, looking for any weasel words or qualifications, but they were straightforward and unambiguous. Deborah had actually done what I asked. I replied to the email. Received. Bring cars over starting tomorrow at 7 a.m. I can accommodate 2 cars at a time for warming sessions. Each car needs about 3 hours. We'll work through the list as quickly as possible. The next morning, my garage became the most popular spot in Meadowbrook Estates. Richard showed up first with a list of affected households and a proposed schedule. He'd organized everything efficiently, prioritizing people with medical needs, job requirements, and other urgent situations. The first 2 cars belonged to a young couple in their 30s, both nurses at the same hospital where Richard worked. They were incredibly grateful, helping me maneuver their vehicles into the garage and waiting patiently while the warmth did its work. Both cars started successfully after 3 hours, and the couple headed off to their shifts. Next came an elderly man who needed to get to a dialysis appointment. His old Chevy truck was frozen solid, but the heated garage brought it back to life. He had tears in his eyes when the engine finally turned over. "I've missed 2 appointments already," he said. "They told me if I missed another one, I'd have to go to the emergency room. Thank you, son. You saved me a world of hurt." Throughout the day, I processed 8 cars. Some people chatted with me while they waited. Others sat quietly in my living room drinking coffee. Everyone was grateful, and several people told me they'd heard about the situation with Deborah and thought what she'd done was wrong. Susan Chambers came by in the afternoon with her Lexus SUV. While her car warmed up, she sat at my kitchen table and told me the story behind the HOA drama. "Deborah's husband is very successful," Susan said carefully. "He makes excellent money as a surgeon and they live comfortably. But Deborah has always been insecure about her own accomplishments. She doesn't work, which is fine, but I think she feels like she needs to prove she's important. The HOA presidency became her identity. So she's a control freak because she's insecure, more or less. When you built that garage, I think she saw it as a challenge to her authority. You didn't ask her permission, you just went ahead and did it the right way through the city. That bothered her because it meant you didn't need her approval. That's crazy." "It is, but it's also human. Deborah's not a bad person deep down. She just let the tiny bit of power go to her head. Hopefully, this is a wake-up call for her." "Did she actually send out that statement to everyone?" Susan pulled out her phone and showed me an email. "She sent it this morning. Everyone in the community got it. The reaction has been mixed. Some people feel bad for her. Others think it's overdue accountability, but everyone's talking about it. Over the next 3 days, I helped 23 households get their cars running again. My garage ran constantly, warming frozen vehicles and bringing them back to life. I became a neighborhood hero, which felt strange and a bit uncomfortable. I hadn't done it for recognition. Well, maybe partially I'd done it to make a point to Deborah, but mostly I'd done it because it was the right thing to do. The temperature finally started rising on Saturday. It climbed all the way up to -5, which felt practically tropical after the week we'd had. Cars were starting on their own again, and the crisis was over. On Sunday morning, I found a basket on my porch. Inside were fresh baked muffins, a bottle of expensive bourbon, and a handwritten note from Richard Hartman. "Ethan, thank you for helping me and so many others this week. You showed real character and generosity, especially given the circumstances." Deborah is embarrassed and angry, but she knows she brought this on herself. I hope in time the two of you can find a way to be civil neighbors. I performed 3 successful surgeries this week because you got my car running. That means 3 people will be going home to their families. You're part of that, and I want you to know how much it means. Thanks again, Richard. I stood on my porch reading the note, feeling the cold wind that was now merely bitter instead of life-threatening. The Mustang waited in the garage, my current project, and the reason I'd built the heated space to begin with. I hadn't worked on it much during the chaos of the past week, but now I could get back to it. Monday brought the official announcement of the new HOA president. Patricia Simmons had been elected by the board to serve out the remainder of Deborah's term. Her first official email to the community was brief and to the point. "Dear neighbors, I'm honored to serve as your HOA president. My goal is to maintain our community standards while being fair, transparent, and respectful to all residents. If you have concerns or questions, please reach out. My door is always open. Best regards, Patricia." It was refreshing in its simplicity. No power trips, no arbitrary enforcement, just straightforward communication. Life returned to normal over the next few weeks. I saw Deborah occasionally in the neighborhood, usually getting into her now functioning Mercedes or collecting her mail. We didn't speak, but she didn't glare at me anymore either. She just looked tired and maybe a bit humbled. Then, in late January, something unexpected happened. I was working in my garage on the Mustang when there was a knock on the side door. I opened it to find Deborah standing there in a heavy coat, her hands shoved in her pockets. "Can I come in for a minute?" she asked. "Sure." She stepped inside and looked around at the garage, taking in the organized workspace, the tools on the walls, the Mustang in the middle of restoration. "This is really nice. Very well done." "Thanks." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke without looking at me. "I owe you a real apology. Not the formal one in the letter, but a genuine, person-to-person apology. What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong at the time, but I was too stubborn and too wrapped up in my own ego to admit it." I set down the wrench I'd been holding. "Why now?" "Because I've spent the last month thinking about it. About how I treated you, about how I abused the position people trusted me with, about how I cost you money and stress over something that was completely legitimate. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." She finally looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen before: genuine remorse. "I appreciate that," I said. "What you did was really difficult for me. I almost considered selling my house and moving because of it." "I know. Richard told me I was wrong from the beginning, but I wouldn't listen. I thought I had to maintain control, had to show that the HOA rules mattered. But I was really just on a power trip, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." "You know why you did it?" She smiled sadly. "A very expensive therapist is helping me figure that out." Short answer: Insecurity, control issues, and a fear of being irrelevant. Apparently, I'm a cliché. That actually made me laugh. We're all clichés sometimes. Thank you for helping everyone during the cold snap. You could have refused, could have let us all suffer. A lot of people would have done that. It crossed my mind, I admitted. But it wouldn't have been right. People needed help and I was in a position to provide it. You're a better person than I am. I don't know about that. I definitely extracted my pound of flesh with the resignation requirement. I deserved that. I deserved worse, honestly. I'm just glad no one sued the HOA. Our insurance company was not happy when they found out about the court case. We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation surprisingly easy. Deborah asked about the Mustang, and I told her about the restoration project. She told me she was thinking about going back to school to get a master's degree in nonprofit management, something she'd always wanted to do but never pursued. Richard's been incredibly supportive through all this, she said. I don't deserve him. Seems like he sees something worth supporting. She smiled. Maybe. Anyway, I should let you get back to work. I just wanted to say what I needed to say. I'm glad you did. After she left, I went back to the Mustang, but I found myself thinking about the conversation. People are complicated. Deborah had done something genuinely wrong, had been called out for it publicly, and was now trying to make amends and grow from the experience. That's more than a lot of people would do. February brought a new challenge, but this time it had nothing to do with the HOA. The heating system in my garage started making a weird noise. I checked it out and realized the main blower motor was starting to fail. It was still under warranty, but the replacement would take a week to arrive. In the meantime, I had to use space heaters to keep the garage warm enough to work. Richard stopped by when he saw me unloading space heaters from my truck. Everything okay? Heater motor is dying. Replacement part is on order. Want me to take a look? I'm not an engineer, but I'm pretty handy. Sure, if you want. We spent the next hour examining the heating system. Richard actually had some good insights, and between the two of us, we managed to jerry-rig a temporary fix that would last until the new part arrived. We were dirty and sweaty by the time we finished, but the heater was running smoothly again. Beer, I offered. Absolutely. We sat in my kitchen drinking beer and talking. Richard told me about his work at the hospital, the stress and satisfaction of cardiac surgery. I told him about my job designing equipment for oil extraction, the technical challenges and problem-solving involved. Deborah told me she came by last week, Richard said eventually. Yeah, that was good of her. She's really trying to change. I know it doesn't undo what happened, but she's putting in the work. I can respect that. She asked me if I thought we could all eventually be friends. I told her that was probably pushing it, but maybe friendly neighbors wasn't out of reach. I thought about it. I think that's possible. The anger I felt has mostly faded. Now it's just history. That's mature of you. I have my moments. Spring arrived in March, and with it came the annual HOA meeting to elect new board members and officers. Patricia Simmons had done a solid job as president, and she was running for a full term. I decided to attend the meeting, partly to stay informed and partly out of curiosity about the neighborhood dynamics post-Deborah. The meeting was well attended, with about 40 residents showing up. Patricia ran it efficiently, moving through the agenda without drama. When it came time for elections, Patricia was re-elected unanimously. The other board positions were filled without controversy. At the end, Patricia made an announcement. Before we adjourn, I want to recognize someone who exemplified what it means to be a good neighbor. During the January cold snap, Vance used his heated garage to help 23 households get their vehicles running. He did this voluntarily, asked for nothing in return, and spent days helping people in need. That's the kind of community spirit we should all aspire to." People applauded. I felt my face getting red, uncomfortable with the attention. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me again or introduce themselves. One of them was a younger guy, probably in his late 20s, who said he was planning to build his own heated garage and wanted to pick my brain about the construction process. "Just make sure you document everything," I advised. "Get your permits, follow the CCRs, and keep records. Most importantly, make sure your addition matches your existing structure so there's no question about material change. Did you have trouble with the HOA? You could say that, but it got resolved. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm." I finished the Mustang restoration by late May, and it turned out beautifully. The deep blue paint gleamed, the chrome sparkled, and the engine purred like a contented cat. I took it for a drive through Bismarck on the first warm Saturday in June, windows down, enjoying the rumble of the V8 and the admiring glances from people on the sidewalks. When I got back to the neighborhood, I saw a small crowd gathered near my driveway. I pulled in slowly and people started applauding. Apparently, word had spread about the restoration project, and neighbors had come out to see the finished product. "That's gorgeous," Susan Chambers said, running her hand gently along the fender. "What a beautiful car." Richard brought Deborah over to see it. She looked at the Mustang, then at me. "Now I understand why you needed the heated garage. This is remarkable work." "Thanks. It was a labor of love. Can I sit in it?" I was surprised but opened the passenger door. Deborah slid into the seat, running her hands over the restored interior. "My dad had one of these when I was a kid. A 1966, red with a white racing stripe. He loved that car. What happened to it? He sold it when money got tight. Always regretted it. He passed away 5 years ago. Never got another one." There was something in her voice, a sadness that went beyond just a car. I understood then that people carry complicated stories, and sometimes those stories explain behavior that otherwise seems inexplicable. Maybe Deborah's issue with my garage had been about more than just control. Maybe it had triggered something about her dad, about loss, about things she couldn't have or couldn't fix. "Want to go for a ride?" I asked on impulse. Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" "Quick spin around the neighborhood." She looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. You'll love it." We drove slowly through Meadowbrook Estates, the Mustang's engine rumbling pleasantly. Deborah didn't say much, just looked out the window with a slight smile on her face. When we got back, she thanked me quietly. "That was special, thank you. Anytime." The summer passed peacefully. I became more involved in the community, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I helped organize a neighborhood barbecue in July, participated in a community cleanup day in August, and even joined the architectural review committee in September. Patricia asked me to serve, and I figured it would be good to have someone on the committee who'd been on the receiving end of arbitrary enforcement. My first case on the committee was reviewing a proposal for a deck addition. The homeowner, a single mom named Rachel, had submitted detailed plans that showed a modest deck off her kitchen. The deck met all size requirements and would be built with materials that matched her house. Deborah was at the committee meeting as a resident observer. When we reviewed Rachel's proposal, Deborah raised her hand. "I just want to say that this looks great. The plans are thorough, it complies with all our requirements, and it'll be a nice addition to Rachel's home. I move that we approve it." The other committee members agreed, and we voted unanimously to approve. After the meeting, Deborah approached me. "I'm trying to learn," she said simply. "I can see that. It's harder than it should be, letting go of the need to control everything, but I'm working on it." That's all anyone can ask. By the time winter rolled around again, my life in Meadowbrook Estates had transformed completely. I went from being the guy in conflict with the HOA to being an active, respected member of the community. My heated garage, the source of all the drama, had become something of a neighborhood asset. When the first cold snap hit in December, 3 different neighbors asked if I had space to warm their cars if needed. I did, and I helped them without hesitation. Deborah and I would never be close friends, but we'd achieved something like détente. We'd wave when we saw each other, occasionally chat if we ended up at the same neighborhood event, and treat each other with basic respect and civility. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it was functional and genuine. On Christmas Eve, I was in my garage putting final touches on a new project when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Richard and Deborah standing there with a wrapped package. "Merry Christmas," Richard said. "We wanted to give you something." I invited them in and opened the package. Inside was a beautiful wooden toolbox, handcrafted with dovetail joints and a brass nameplate engraved with my initials. "Richard made it," Deborah said. "He does woodworking as a hobby." "This is incredible," I said, running my hands over the smooth wood. "Thank you." "It's a small gesture considering everything," Richard said. "But we wanted you to know we appreciate you being a good neighbor despite having every reason not to be." "People make mistakes," I said. "What matters is what you do after." We talked for a while, standing in the warm garage while snow fell gently outside. They admired my new project, a vintage motorcycle I'd picked up cheap and was beginning to restore. Deborah asked intelligent questions about the process, and Richard offered to help with some of the mechanical work if I needed an extra set of hands. When they left, I stood in my garage for a long time, looking at the toolbox and thinking about the journey of the past year. I'd moved to North Dakota for a job, bought a house, and gotten caught up in absurd HOA drama that had escalated to court. I'd been vindicated, had gotten my petty revenge, and had then helped the same people who'd made my life difficult. Through it all, I'd learned something about grace, accountability, and the messy complexity of human relationships. The heated garage hummed quietly, keeping the space warm and comfortable. Outside, the temperature was dropping toward 0, but inside, everything was perfect. My truck sat ready for whatever the winter would bring. The Mustang gleamed in the corner, a testament to patience and craftsmanship. The motorcycle waited for attention, a new challenge to tackle. This was what I'd wanted when I built the garage. A space to work, to create, to maintain the things that mattered to me. The fact that it had also saved the day during a crisis and taught valuable lessons about power and humility was just a bonus. I thought about Deborah's initial letter, the threats of fines and liens, the anger and frustration I'd felt. All of that seemed distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. I wasn't naive enough to think everyone learned perfect lessons or that all conflicts resolved neatly. But sometimes, when people face consequences and choose to genuinely change, redemption is possible. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke to find the neighborhood transformed by fresh snow. Everything looked clean and pristine, a blank canvas. I made coffee and looked out at the quiet street, seeing decorated houses and cars in driveways. Everyone's vehicles were running fine now, the cold snap having passed without incident. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Brennan, my attorney and the woman who'd first stood up for me at that HOA meeting. "Merry Christmas. Hope you're enjoying that heated garage and that the HOA is behaving itself," I replied. "All quiet on the Western Front. Thanks for everything you did." She responded, "Anytime. Best case I had all year. Judge Thornton's smackdown of that HOA attorney made my whole month." I spent Christmas Day quietly, working on the motorcycle and video chatting with my parents in Ohio. They asked about the house, the job, the infamous garage saga. I gave them the full story, and my mom laughed when I described Deborah showing up desperate for help during the cold snap. "That's karma," Mom said, "but it sounds like you handled it well. Your dad and I raised you right." I had my petty moments. Nothing wrong with that. She had it coming. The important thing is you helped people when it mattered. That evening, I was reading in my living room when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a teenage girl I recognized as living 3 houses down. She looked nervous. "Hi, Mr. Vance. I'm Emma. My mom's car won't start and she has to work tomorrow morning. She's a nurse and they're short-staffed at the hospital. Is there any way we could use your garage to warm up the car?" "Of course. Let me grab my keys." We walked down to her house, where her mom, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, was trying unsuccessfully to start a Honda Civic. "I'm so sorry to bother you on Christmas," she said. "I wouldn't ask, but I really can't miss this shift." "It's no problem. That's what the garage is for." We got the Civic into my garage, and I assured Emma and her mom it would be ready to go by morning. They thanked me profusely and headed back to their house. I stayed in the garage for a while, making sure the heating system was working properly and the car was warming evenly. This, I realized, was the real victory. Not the court case or Deborah's resignation or the neighborhood recognition. The real victory was having built something useful, something that served a genuine purpose beyond my own convenience. The heated garage wasn't just about protecting my vehicles or having a comfortable workspace. It was about being prepared, being self-sufficient, and being able to help when help was needed. The HOA had tried to take that away, had tried to force me to tear down something valuable because of arbitrary interpretations and personal power trips. They'd failed, and in failing, they'd learned important lessons about leadership, fairness, and the consequences of abuse of authority. Deborah had faced public accountability, lost her position, and begun the difficult work of genuine personal growth. The community had rallied around common sense and mutual support. As January arrived and the new year began, I reflected on everything that had happened. 12 months earlier, I'd been a relative newcomer to Bismarck, focused on my job and my hobbies, not particularly invested in community life. Now, I was an active HOA committee member, a recognized neighborhood resource, and someone who'd inadvertently catalyzed positive changes in local governance. The heated garage stood as a monument to perseverance and the importance of standing up for what's right. Every time I pulled my truck into that warm space on a frigid morning, every time I helped a neighbor get their car running, every time I worked on a restoration project in comfort, I was reminded that doing things the right way matters. Following proper procedures, understanding regulations, and building with quality and care had paid off in ways I never expected. Patricia proved to be an excellent HOA president. Under her leadership, the board became more transparent, more responsive, and more focused on genuine community needs rather than petty enforcement. Violation notices decreased dramatically, while participation in community events increased. People felt heard and respected, which made them more willing to comply with reasonable regulations. In February, Patricia asked me to write an article for the community newsletter about the garage addition process. She wanted other residents to understand how to properly navigate additions and improvements. I spent an evening putting together a comprehensive guide covering city permits, HOA approval processes, contractor selection, and documentation best practices. "This is excellent," Patricia said when she reviewed the draft. "Clear, thorough, and helpful. This is exactly what people need." I learned most of it the hard way. That's often the best teacher. Your experience, as difficult as it was, can help others avoid similar problems. The article ran in the March newsletter and generated a lot of positive feedback. 3 different residents reached out to me for advice on their own home improvement projects. I was happy to help, walking them through the process and sharing lessons learned. None of them encountered HOA resistance, which suggested that the organization had truly reformed its approach. By spring, my life had achieved a comfortable equilibrium. Work was going well, with a promotion to senior engineer and a significant raise. The Mustang was a reliable weekend cruiser, turning heads wherever I drove it. The motorcycle restoration was coming along nicely, and I'd started planning another project for the following winter. On a Saturday afternoon in April, I was washing the Mustang in my driveway when Deborah walked by with her dog, a golden retriever named Bailey. She stopped to chat, and Bailey immediately came over to sniff the car and demand attention. "Beautiful day," Deborah said, her voice relaxed and genuine. "Finally feels like winter is over. Thank goodness. I don't think I could handle another cold snap like January's. None of us could." She was quiet for a moment, watching me work. "I started classes last month, the nonprofit management program I mentioned. How's it going?" "It's challenging but good. I'm learning a lot about ethical leadership and organizational governance. Lots of it makes me cringe thinking about how I handled the HOA. Live and learn. I'm writing a paper about abuse of authority in volunteer organizations. Using my own experience as a case study, my professor thinks it'll be a strong piece. That takes courage, being that honest about your mistakes. It's necessary. If I can help other people avoid similar failures, then something good comes from what I did wrong." We talked for a while longer, the conversation easy and without tension. Bailey rolled around on the grass, happy in the sunshine. It struck me that this was what healthy community looked like. People with complicated histories finding ways to coexist with respect and basic goodwill. As summer arrived and then faded into fall, the events of the previous year began to feel like ancient history. New people moved into the neighborhood, unaware of the garage drama. To them, I was just Ethan, the guy with the cool cars and the heated garage who sometimes helped people out. The story gradually became neighborhood lore, told at community gatherings with the rough edges smoothed out. The HOA had overreached, got slapped down by a judge, learned some lessons, and everyone moved forward. When the first snow fell in November, I was ready. The heated garage was functioning perfectly, newly serviced and prepared for another brutal North Dakota winter. My truck and the Mustang sat comfortably inside, protected and warm. The motorcycle restoration was complete, and I'd started the next project, a vintage Jeep that needed complete rebuilding. Richard stopped by to admire the Jeep and offer assistance. We spent Sunday afternoons working on it together, gradually becoming genuine friends rather than just friendly neighbors. He told me stories about his surgeries, and I shared challenges from work. Deborah sometimes joined us, bringing coffee and asking questions about the restoration process. The 3 of us had formed an unlikely friendship, built on accountability, forgiveness, and shared interests. In December, the community held its holiday party at the clubhouse. I attended with a homemade dessert and ended up having long conversations with neighbors I'd only known casually before. People asked about my projects, shared their own hobbies and interests, and treated me like a valued member of the community. It was a far cry from the isolation and conflict of the previous year. Patricia cornered me near the end of the party. "I wanted to tell you something. The board just finalized the budget for next year, and we've included funds for a community emergency preparedness program. Part of that includes guidelines for residents with specialized resources, like your heated garage, to coordinate help during crises. We're calling it the Community Resource Network. That sounds great. It was inspired by what you did during the cold snap. We realized we need better systems for neighbors helping neighbors. Your garage is listed as an emergency vehicle warming station if you're comfortable with that designation. I'm honored. You earned it. You showed us what community really means. As the party wound down and people headed home through the gentle snowfall, I stood outside the clubhouse for a moment, looking at the neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows, decorations sparkled on houses, and smoke rose from chimneys. It was peaceful and beautiful, a place where people lived and worked and sometimes fought but ultimately found ways to get along. The heated garage at 4782 Clearwater Drive stood ready for whatever the winter would bring. It had survived attempts to destroy it, served as a refuge during crisis, and become a symbol of perseverance and community service. More than that, it was exactly what I'd envisioned when I first drew up the plans. A warm, functional space where I could pursue my passions and maintain the things I valued. The story could have ended differently. If I'd backed down when Deborah first threatened me, I would have wasted money on construction and then demolition, and the neighborhood would have suffered without the resource during the cold snap. If I'd refused to help anyone out of spite, people would have suffered, and I would have confirmed Deborah's worst characterization of me as selfish and difficult. Instead, by standing up for what was right, forcing accountability, and then extending help when it mattered most, I'd created something larger than just a garage. I'd helped catalyze positive change in how the HOA operated, modeled how neighbors should treat each other, and built genuine relationships with people who'd started as adversaries. As I drove home that night, my truck warming instantly in the heated garage, I thought about the journey of the past year and a half. The frustration, anger, vindication, petty satisfaction, genuine compassion, and hard-won friendships had all been part of a larger story about community, accountability, and grace. Deborah had learned that power without responsibility leads to consequences. I'd learned that being right isn't enough. You also have to find ways to move forward constructively. The garage door closed behind me, sealing out the winter cold. Inside, everything was warm, organized, and ready for whatever projects and challenges lay ahead. The Mustang gleamed under the LED lights. The completed motorcycle sat on its stand, polished and perfect. The Jeep waited for more work, its restoration barely begun. Each project represented patience, skill, and dedication to doing things right. That's what the garage had always been about, really. Not just a place to work on vehicles, but a commitment to quality, preparation, and self-reliance. The fact that it had also become a community resource and the catalyst for positive change was a bonus, an unexpected dividend on the investment. I locked up and headed into the house, comfortable in the knowledge that my vehicles were protected, my projects were waiting, and my place in the community was secure. The HOA had tried to ban my heated garage, then begged for space when their cars froze solid overnight. Through that crisis and its aftermath, everyone involved had learned valuable lessons about power, responsibility, and what it truly means to be a good neighbor. The garage would stand for decades, serving its purpose long after the drama that nearly destroyed it was forgotten. Every time someone pulled in to warm a frozen car, every time I worked late into a winter evening on a restoration project, every time the heating system kicked on with its reliable hum, the garage would be fulfilling exactly the purpose I'd intended. providing a warm, functional space where good work could be done, and people could be helped when help was needed. That was enough. That was everything.